First contact gone wrong. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood at the bridge of the UES Hawking, watching the crystalline ships of the Viridian fleet shimmer against the backdrop of deep space. Their vessels weren't built so much as grown, massive geometric structures that seemed to defy conventional physics. Each ship's surface refracted starlight like a precision-cut diamond, creating rainbow patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. "They're broadcasting again, Captain," Lieutenant Park announced from his communication station. "Same frequency as before." Elena nodded, her jaw tight. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the crystalline form of Supreme Commander Varix. Like all Viridians, his body was a complex arrangement of transparent silicon-based crystals, internal structures visible through his translucent exterior. When he moved, light scattered through his form in mesmerizing patterns. "Your species continues to disappoint, Captain Rodriguez." Varix's voice resonated through the bridge, each word accompanied by subtle pulses of light within his crystalline form. "We offered you the chance to submit to Viridian protection. Your rejection of our generous terms leaves us no choice but to demonstrate our superiority." Elena's fingers tightened on the armrests of her command chair. 3 months ago, the Viridians had appeared at the edge of human space, claiming to be saviors who would elevate humanity to a higher form of existence. Their process of elevation involved forcibly converting organic beings into crystalline forms, a fate worse than death, according to the few survivors they'd rescued from experimental Viridian facilities. "We've been clear about our position, Commander," Elena replied, keeping her voice steady. "Humanity doesn't need or want your protection. We're not your test subjects, and we won't submit to forced transformation." Varix's crystalline form pulsed with what Elena had learned to recognize as amusement. "Your primitive organic form limits your understanding. We are perfection incarnate. Immortal, invulnerable, infinite. Your weapons cannot harm our crystalline bodies. Your shields cannot withstand our resonance cannons. Resistance is not only futile, it's illogical." The transmission cut off abruptly as the first volley of Viridian weapons fire streaked across space. The UES Hawking shuddered as resonance beams struck their shields, the energy weapons designed to shatter conventional matter at a molecular level. "Shields at 60%. Lieutenant Commander Zhang called out from tactical. "Their weapons are still getting through our adaptive harmonics." Elena had expected this. The Viridians' confidence wasn't entirely unfounded. Their crystalline technology was far advanced beyond humanity's current capabilities. Traditional energy weapons barely scratched their ship's surfaces, and kinetic weapons shattered harmlessly against their latticed crystal structure. "Launch the drones," Elena ordered. "Full spread, pattern delta. Let's at least get some decent scans of their hull composition while we're getting our asses kicked." The battle that followed was brief and brutal. The Hawking managed to hold its own longer than expected, thanks to Elena's tactical innovations, but the outcome was never really in doubt. As they initiated emergency jump protocols to retreat, Elena watched the sensor data streaming in from the drones with intense interest. "Download complete," Zhang confirmed as the jump drive spooled up. "We've got detailed compositional analysis of their hull structure." Elena allowed herself a small smile as the ship jumped to safety. The Viridians thought this had been another failed human resistance. They didn't realize they'd just given humanity exactly what it needed: comprehensive data on the molecular structure of their crystalline technology. "Send everything to Dr. Chen at the Terra Nova Research Station," Elena commanded. "Priority channel, highest encryption." Add a personal note. "Sarah, remember that solution you were working on in grad school? The one about dissolving problematic crystal formations? I think I found you a new test subject." As the Hawking limped back to human space, Elena stared at the tactical display showing the advancing Viridian fleet. They thought themselves invulnerable, their crystalline forms impervious to harm. But if there was one thing humanity had proven time and time again, it was this: everything had a weakness. You just had to know where to look. And sometimes, the most devastating weapons weren't the ones that shattered your enemy. They were the ones that simply made them dissolve. The war was about to take a very different turn. The chemistry of war. Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the molecular visualization floating above her lab bench, her dark eyes reflecting the holographic shimmer of crystalline structures slowly dissolving in simulated solvent. 3 weeks of sleepless nights had led to this moment, and the implications made her stomach churn. "Run it again," she ordered the lab's eye. "Full spectrum analysis, particular attention to dissolution rates and environmental stability." The simulation reset, showing the complex silicon-based crystal matrix of Viridian technology. As the organic solvent molecules she designed were introduced, the seemingly impervious structure began to break down at an atomic level. It was elegant, efficient, and absolutely terrifying. Dr. Chen, her assistant, Marcus Wong, appeared at the lab entrance. "Admiral Harrison is here for the briefing." Sarah nodded, not taking her eyes off the simulation. "Send him in. And Marcus, initiate privacy protocols." Admiral James Harrison entered the lab with the careful steps of someone used to walking on ships rather than planetary facilities. His weathered face carried new lines since Sarah had last seen him, testament to the brutal months of warfare against the Viridian fleet. "Please tell me you have something," Harrison said without preamble. "We lost the Artemis colony yesterday. 8 million civilians." His voice cracked slightly on the number. Sarah gestured to the hologram. "I solved the dissolution problem. The Viridians' crystalline structure isn't just their technology, it's them. Their entire civilization is built on silicon-based crystal matrices, grown and shaped into everything from their ships to their bodies. And you can break it down. More than that." Sarah manipulated the display, showing molecular structures. "Their crystal matrix has a fundamental vulnerability to certain organic solvents. I've engineered a compound that specifically targets their unique atomic arrangement. It doesn't just break them down, it prevents recrystallization. One exposure, and their entire structure begins to dissolve." Harrison studied the simulation, his expression grim. "How quickly?" "Full dissolution of a Viridian vessel would take approximately 30 minutes. Their personal forms would break down in less than 5. Sarah swallowed hard. "Admiral, this isn't just a weapon. It's potentially genocide. They're not giving us much choice, Doctor." Harrison's voice was quiet but firm. "The Viridians have made it clear. They won't stop until humanity submits to forced crystallization. You've seen the transformation chambers. You know what happens to the people they elevate." Sarah walked to her desk, pulling up footage from rescued human colonies. The images showed crystallization chambers where humans were forcibly converted into twisted, malformed crystal structures. The process had a success rate of less than 2%. The failures, she quickly closed the footage. "I understand the stakes," she said. "But this solvent, it won't just kill them. It will unmake them. Everything they are, everything they've built, reduced to component molecules. And once it's released into space." She trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. Harrison was silent for a long moment. "How long to weaponize it?" "The compound is stable enough to be stored in standard military containment units. We can modify existing missile platforms to deliver it." "But Admiral," Sarah met his eyes. "If we do this, we need to understand what it means. This isn't just another weapon. We'll be introducing something into the universe that can break down the very essence of their civilization. The ethical implications were considered the moment they decided to forcibly transform our species," Harrison interrupted. "Doctor, I appreciate your concerns. They're valid, and they're important. But right now, the Viridians are advancing through our territory, converting every human they capture into crystalline abominations. We're running out of time and options." Sarah turned back to the simulation, watching the elegant crystal structure dissolve into its component parts. She thought of her sister on one of the frontier colonies, of the millions of humans at risk. The weight of the decision pressed down on her like a physical force. "I'll need a secure facility," she finally said. And a team I can trust. This has to be handled perfectly. One containment breach could have catastrophic consequences. Harrison nodded. You'll have everything you need. Project codename. Sarah watched the last crystalline structures in the simulation dissolve into their base components. Call it Project Dissolution. As Harrison left to make the arrangements, Sarah remained in her lab, watching the simulation loop again and again. The Viridians believed themselves to be the peak of evolution, their crystalline forms perfect and eternal. They'd never considered that their greatest strength could become their greatest vulnerability. In her mind, she could already hear the arguments that would follow. About ethics, about proportional response, about the nature of warfare itself. But as she began preparing the initial production protocols, Sarah remembered something her quantum mechanics professor had once said. In science, elegance often masks devastation. The simplest solutions are frequently the most terrible. She had found a terribly simple solution. Now humanity just had to live with the consequences of using it. Operation Dissolution. High Commander Zixtal of the Viridian Ascendancy watched the approaching human fleet with something approaching pity. Their vessels were crude, organic technology wrapped in metal shells, practically primitive compared to the crystalline majesty of his own forces. This would be another simple victory in their campaign of elevation. They've modified their weapon systems, his tactical analyst reported, light patterns flickering through their crystalline form. New delivery mechanisms detected. Irrelevant. Zixtal dismissed. Our forms are perfect. Let them waste their resources on futile innovations. Across the void of space, aboard the UES Normandy, Captain Elena Rodriguez received the final confirmation from her weapons officer. All ships report solvent warheads armed and ready, Captain. Dr. Chen's final calculations have been distributed to all targeting systems. Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. Send the warning one last time. They deserve that much at least. The message was brief. Viridian Command, this is your final opportunity to withdraw from human space and cease all forced crystallization attempts. You have 10 minutes to comply. The response came almost immediately, a burst of crystalline laughter from High Commander Zixtal. Your species' persistence in the face of inevitability would be admirable if it weren't so futile. Perhaps we'll preserve your brain patterns as a study in organic irrationality after your elevation. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. So be it. All ships, execute Operation Dissolution. Primary targets only. We're not monsters. Yet. The first wave of missiles launched, their trajectories carefully plotted to hit only military targets. The Viridians didn't even bother to dodge, their confidence in their invulnerability absolute. Their point defense systems destroyed many of the incoming projectiles, but enough got through. The warheads detonated, releasing clouds of engineered solvent into space. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then the calls started coming from the Viridian fleet. High Commander. The panic in the tactical analyst's voice was evident in their rapidly shifting light patterns. The hull. It's degrading. Unknown chemical agent is breaking down our crystal matrix. Zixtal watched in horror as sections of his flagship's structure began to lose coherence. The perfect crystalline lattice that had been grown over centuries was dissolving before his eyes. Impossible. We are perfection given form. We cannot be. His words cut off as the bridge's structural integrity failed, emergency force fields barely containing the atmosphere. Throughout the Viridian fleet, ships began to lose their shape, their once beautiful geometric forms turning cloudy, then translucent, then simply dissolving. All ships, hold position, Elena ordered, her voice tight. No secondary strikes. Let's not make this any worse than it has to be. She watched the sensor readings with a mixture of awe and horror as the mighty Viridian fleet literally dissolved into space. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 27 minutes. When it was over, nothing remained of the Viridian battle fleet except clouds of molecular debris and a few intact core sections where the solvent hadn't fully penetrated. From the remnants of the Viridian flagship came a transmission, the voice of High Commander Zixtal distorted and failing. What have you done to us?" "We did what we had to do," Alina responded, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "You thought your crystalline form made you invulnerable. We proved you wrong. Withdraw your forces from human space, end this war, or the next time, we won't be so selective with our targets." The silence that followed lasted almost 5 minutes. When Zixtal spoke again, his voice carried something the Viridians had never before expressed to humans: respect. Perhaps we have miscalculated. Our elevation protocols were based on the assumption that organic forms were inherently inferior. Yet you have demonstrated a capacity for innovation that we did not anticipate. Elena leaned forward in her command chair. "Does this mean you're ready to negotiate?" "We request time to consider, to reevaluate. Our perfect form has been proven imperfect. This requires contemplation." As the surviving Viridian ships retreated, Alina sent a priority message to command. "Operation Dissolution successful. Enemy forces in retreat. Requesting immediate conference with scientific team regarding containment protocols for molecular debris. We've won this battle, but we need to make sure we haven't just introduced something into the universe that we'll all regret." She stared at the slowly dispersing clouds that had once been living beings, their perfect crystalline forms reduced to their component molecules. Victory had never tasted so bitter. In her quarters later, Alina recorded in her personal log, "Today we proved that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, our strategies, or even our weapons. It's our ability to look at something seemingly perfect and find its fundamental flaw. The question now is, what flaws will others find in us?" The price of victory. 3 months after Operation Dissolution, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in a containment suit before the United Earth Council, presenting data that kept her awake at night. The chamber was packed with military leaders, scientists, and politicians, all here to learn the true cost of their victory. "The solvent weapon exceeded our tactical expectations," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "But its long-term effects are concerning. This simulation shows the current spread of molecular contamination." The holographic display above the council chamber showed a map of the battle sector, with spreading clouds of red indicating contaminated space. The clouds were growing. "The solvent molecules remain active in space," Sarah continued. "They're not just persisting, they're replicating. Every piece of Viridian technology they encounter becomes raw material for creating more solvent. We've created a self-propagating weapon that's effectively eating its way through their civilization." Admiral Harrison, now showing the weight of command more than ever, leaned forward. "Can it be contained?" "We're working on a neutralizing agent, but—" Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "The solvent is evolving. Each new generation shows subtle changes. It's becoming more efficient at breaking down crystalline structures. Not just Viridian tech, any silicon-based crystals." The implications hit the room like a physical force. Councillor Patel was the first to speak. "Are you saying we've created some kind of molecular plague?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Sarah switched the display to show sensor readings from the contaminated zones. "We've introduced something into the universe that could theoretically break down any silicon-based life form or technology. If it reaches certain types of planets." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew that silicon-based life forms had been discovered on several worlds. They'd just never seemed particularly important to human interests before. The chamber erupted in heated discussion. Sarah stood silently, watching the panic spread. A message flashed on her personal display. "Urgent communication from Viridian Peace Delegation." The message contained only sensor data and 6 words: "We need to talk. Both species depend on it." 2 days later, Sarah found herself aboard a neutral station, facing a Viridian scientist named Telax. Unlike the warrior caste she'd seen in combat footage, Telax's crystalline form was delicate, almost artistic in its complexity. "Your weapon is remarkable," Telak said, their inner light patterns shifting in what Sarah had learned to recognize as scientific curiosity. "But it will destroy us both if not stopped." "Both?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. Telak's form shimmered as they brought up their own data displays. "We've tracked the solvent's evolution. It's becoming more aggressive, more adaptable. And it's starting to affect non-viridian crystalline structures, including some you might not have considered." The display showed Earth. "Silicon," Sarah whispered. "Computer chips, solar panels, communication systems. Your civilization depends on silicon-based technology almost as much as ours depends on our crystalline forms," Telak confirmed. "Different applications, same vulnerability. If the solvent continues to evolve and spread." They left the sentence unfinished. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Her weapon, designed to save humanity, might end up destroying both civilizations. "We need to work together," she said finally. "Your knowledge of crystalline structures, combined with our understanding of organic chemistry." "Yes," Telak agreed. "Perhaps this is the universe's way of teaching both our species humility. You proved our physical form was not perfect. We're about to prove that no weapon can be perfectly controlled." As they began sharing data, Sarah received another message from Elena Rodriguez, now promoted to Admiral. "Multiple silicon-based life form worlds reporting unusual degradation patterns. Whatever you're working on with the Viridians, work faster. We thought we were ending a war. We might have started something much worse." Sarah looked at Telak, seeing not an enemy but a fellow scientist facing an extinction-level threat. "Tell me everything you know about crystal reformation. We created this weapon by understanding how to break down your structures. Maybe we can save everyone by learning how to build them back up." Telak's light patterns showed agreement. "Perhaps this collaboration will lead to something greater than either of our species could achieve alone. After all, it was your organic adaptability combined with our crystalline perfection that created this problem. And maybe that same combination can solve it," Sarah finished. They worked through the night, organic and crystalline minds united against a threat that cared nothing for the differences between their species. The war had started because the Viridians believed in perfection. It would only end when both species accepted their imperfections and learned to work together. Above them, in the vast expanse of space, clouds of dissolving molecules continued to spread, a reminder that sometimes victory can be more dangerous than defeat. Peace through understanding. 6 months after the discovery of the solvent's evolution, the combined research station, Unity, orbited a dying star. The facility, a hybrid of human and Viridian technology, represented the last hope for both civilizations. Inside the primary laboratory, Dr. Sarah Chen and Telak worked alongside dozens of human and Viridian scientists. The room was a stark contrast of organic and crystalline technology, a physical representation of their desperate collaboration. "The latest simulation is ready," Sarah announced, her voice hoarse from too many sleepless nights. The holographic display showed the spreading contamination, now covering nearly a tenth of known space. Red zones marked areas where silicon-based life had already begun to deteriorate. "Implementing the revised stabilization matrix," Telak responded, their crystalline form pulsing with focused energy. The simulation shifted, showing their latest attempt at a solution, an engineered counter-agent that combined organic compounds with reconstructed crystalline patterns. Admiral Elena Rodriguez watched from the observation deck above, accompanied by what remained of the Viridian High Council. The war felt like a lifetime ago, though its consequences threatened to outlive them all. "The arrogance of both our species led to this," said Council Elder Vixna, their once perfect crystalline form showing signs of molecular degradation at the edges. "We thought we could force evolution. You thought you could control molecular chaos." "We were both wrong," Elena agreed. "But maybe being wrong together is better than being right alone." Below, the simulation reached its completion. Sarah and Telak stood motionless, analyzing the results. After a moment that felt like eternity, Sarah's hands began to shake. "It's working," she whispered, then louder. "It's actually working." The display showed the counteragent successfully neutralizing the solvent while simultaneously providing a framework for damaged crystalline structures to rebuild themselves. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was enough. The organic compounds provide flexibility while the crystalline matrix adds stability. Telex explained, their light patterns showing what humans had learned to recognize as joy. Neither approach would work alone. Together we survive. Sarah finished. The implementation would take years. Thousands of ships, human and Viridian working in concert, would need to deploy the counteragent across affected space. Some areas would never fully recover, but both civilizations would survive. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the new Joint Species Council chamber on Earth, watching as human and Viridian leaders signed the Unified Development Accord. The document formally ended the war and established protocols for cooperative advancement of both species. The solvent weapon will be remembered as both our greatest mistake and our greatest opportunity, Alina said in her address to the Council. It taught us that true strength lies not in perfection, but in adaptation. Not in dominance, but in cooperation. Telex, now serving as chief science advisor to both species, added their own observations. We sought to elevate humanity by force, believing our crystalline form to be the peak of evolution. Instead, humanity elevated us by showing us our flaws. In accepting imperfection, we found a better path forward. The accord included the establishment of joint research facilities across human and Viridian space, focused on combining the best aspects of both species' technologies. The forced crystallization program was permanently abandoned, replaced with voluntary genetic and technological enhancement programs that respected the diversity of all life forms. In her private quarters that evening, Sarah found a message from Alina. They're calling it the Chen-Telex principle. The strongest solutions arise from combining seemingly incompatible approaches. Your weapon almost destroyed 2 civilizations. Your collaboration saved them both. Sarah smiled, looking out at the earth below. On the horizon, she could see the crystalline spires of the new Viridian embassy catching the sunset, their surfaces modified to be immune to the solvent that had nearly ended everything. They stood as monuments to a simple truth. Sometimes the greatest threats can lead to the most meaningful changes. We thought we were fighting a war, she wrote back to Alina. Instead, we were learning how to build a future. Not perfect, not pure, but stronger because of its hybrid nature. Outside her window, ships of both species moved through Earth's orbit, organic and crystalline, separate but united. The war had ended not with the triumph of one form of life over another, but with the recognition that diversity itself was strength. The solvent weapon had dissolved more than just crystalline structures. It had dissolved the barriers between species, the illusion of perfection, and the notion that any one form of life was superior to another. In its wake, something new had crystallized, a future where humanity and the Viridians would face the universe's challenges together, each made stronger by the other's presence. It wasn't perfect, but then again, perfection had never been the answer.